Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Authors and Agents with Rose Quinn. Today I have the wonderful author Jael Richardson on the podcast with me today. She is the author of a memoir, a picture book, and has her fiction debut, Gutter Child, coming out here in just a handful of days. You guys are really going to enjoy getting to know her. She shares some really great, information about her publishing experience, her writing style, and just lets us get to know her through this interview. She does give a couple of great book recommendations, so hold on for those at the end. Alrighty, so my favorite book of the week this week is one that I'm actually still reading. I was super lucky to get an arc of The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. It's really well done, so let me go ahead and read you the blurb. 16-year-old Deka lives in fear and anticipation of the blood ceremony that will determine whether she will become a member of her village. Already different from everyone else because of her unnatural intuition, Deka prays for red blood so she can finally feel like she belongs. But on the day of the ceremony, her blood runs gold, the color of impurity, and Deka knows she will face a consequence worse than death. Then a mysterious woman comes to her with a choice: stay in the village and submit to her fate, or leave to fight for the emperor and an army of girls just like her. They are called Alaki. I probably am pronouncing most of these words wrong. Near immortals with rare gifts, and they are the only ones who can stop the Empire's greatest threat. Knowing the dangers that lie ahead, yet yearning for acceptance, Deka decides to leave the only life she's ever known. But as she journeys to the capital to train for the biggest battle of her life, she will discover that the great walled city holds many surprises. Nothing and no one are quite what they seem to be, not even Deka herself. Like I said, I'm not done with this book yet, but the world building is wonderful. You're drawn into the story from the very beginning, and the things about Deka that are a little bit different than the other girls like her are super interesting, and you want to know what that's all about. So yeah, I'm really excited to finish it, but I know that I'm gonna love it already. I love stories like this, and it's very much about women too, and our strength and the things in our societies that try and hold us down, So I'm super excited to finish it, and make sure that you watch out for The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. It comes out on February 9th. So we're less than a month away, and you guys don't want to miss that one. All right, let's go ahead and get to know Jael. Let's go ahead and start off by you telling me about Gutter Child.
So Gutter Child is my first novel, and it came about after I was writing my memoir, which was my first official book, about my father. My father, who grew up in the States, grew up in a pretty low-income community in the projects, in a segregated community. And when we went back there to do some research on for a documentary, that's really where Gutter Child came to be in terms of an idea. And the real question that launched from visiting my dad's hometown was, what does it look like to grow up in a world that's designed for your failure?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, of course, about, segregation in the U.S. and the civil rights movement, but I was also thinking about the ways that continues to exist today.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a dystopia because I felt like I wanted to address things that were not so much set in one place or one country, but were really systems that impact us all.
Wow. I've did a little bit of searching on you and read kind of the story of your memoir, which was then later turned into a picture book, right?
Yeah.
And, I'm really excited to read Gutter Child. I think it's coming out at a good time in the world. I feel like there's a lot of conversation around things like this, so I feel like it'll, help further that movement. But, I'm very excited to read it and, understand it a little bit more, because I am, I'm not a person of color, and so that's, as a white person, we've got some work to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I think I grew up with a lot of privilege, even as a black girl in the suburbs. And a lot of the story, which centers around a young woman named Elamina, is also about what happens when you have privilege and then that privilege is taken away, and you suddenly realize like what you've been growing up in. And so in the story, Elamina arrives at this school, Livingstone Academy, and the novel starts with her realizing what she's looking at and the kind of world she's living in and what that might mean for her future. Because I was really interested about, so many people grow up in different systems of oppression, whether that's poverty or you're in a racialized community or you're from a queer or just a marginalized community.
Yeah.
And at some point you realize, things are kind of stacked against you. And so I was interested in that moment, what happens when that moment comes, and what you do about it is really what the novel is about.
Well, I can't wait to read it, and I can't wait to, I've heard such great things about it already, so, I can't wait to read it and see how people react to it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your journey to not only having, your fiction debut come out, but to being published and having a memoir and a picture book come out.
Yeah, I think for me, when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a professional actor, and then there was also small moments of, other kinds of work that I was going to do. I had never, in my high school years, sort of pictured myself being a writer, even though I loved reading. And I think a lot of that was because what I was reading was a lot of, white voices. There wasn't really a sense for me that my voice was valuable.
Yeah.
And so when I realized my dad's story, and he has this incredible undefeated winning streak, his name's Chuck Ely, you can look him up, and he has this incredible story. And when I realized that, regardless of whether I saw myself as a writer, my dad's story needed to be told. And so that's how I wrote The Stone Thrower, and why I turned it into a children's book, because there was just this sense that people needed to know my dad's story, how he had come from these very difficult circumstances, won all these football games, and then still wasn't drafted into the NFL. I just thought it was an incredible story.
Yeah.
And when I finished Stone Thrower memoir, I started writing Gutter Child right away. And that moment, that transition between those two books, was where I really believed and recognized myself as a writer. I think up until even publishing Stone Thrower felt like this sort of family project.
Yeah.
But when I finished it and I wanted to write something else, that's when I was like, I think this is it. I think this is what I want to do.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I love that you took this passion to share your father's story, and he has quite an incredible story for sure. And it led you down this path. I think that is super cool. Tell me how querying went for you. I know that querying a memoir is probably different than querying for fiction. Did you have the same agent? Kind of how did that go? And then maybe any tips for writers who are in the querying process right now.
Yeah, querying is a disaster, generally speaking. It's an emotional disaster. It's a mental disaster.
Yes.
It's a lot. The whole process is a lot. So I think that first you have to just own that. I was fortunate with the memoir that a teacher in my MFA program actually shared it with a friend, and that friend was interested in it, was a publisher, and wanted it right away.
Wonderful.
I should say wanted it right away in quotations,
right.
Because what he did was call and give me 3 pages worth of notes about what could be better. And at the time I was like, I disagree. Of course, when you get feedback, you're like, I disagree. This book is amazing.
Yes.
But it was helpful. I remember very distinctly that he said, I had a black woman look it over, and these notes are from both of us. And I thought that was both awkward but very helpful, because it helped me to see, that was the first time, I think, at that point, a black reader had eyes on it. So It made the feedback even more important to me. So that part, the part that was difficult was I spent a year with that new feedback, reworking the manuscript without a contract. And that was just, it was hard, because you're doing all this work and you don't even know if they're going to accept it.
Oh, yeah.
And then by the time they did accept it, the turnaround for publishing was very short, like shorter than anyone would ever, like 8 months, which is unheard of.
Wow.
And that includes printing it. So I only had about 6 months to do the real official work on it. And that was the worst. And then the children's book, I also got a recommendation from that same editor, or one of the editors that was working on the memoir, to a children's publisher. So the first time I really started pitching books was for Gutter Child. And when I was pitching Gutter Child, I got a lot of rejections. I got rejections from agents first, and then I finally got the agent that I have now, and that was great. But then when I went to share, like when we went to shop it around again, I got a number of rejections at that time as well. And I started to, of course, question whether it was a good book, whether it was worthwhile, what I was going to do about it. And I've still been getting rejections since in other ways, too. Because, you know, I still, it's not officially published in the States yet. And so there's all these moments, these obstacles, and every obstacle makes you question and say, like, should I even be doing this? What's the point? And you have to have a reason and a what's the point, or you will give up. And so for me, I really believe very strongly. I believed very strongly in Stone Thrower. That was easy. My dad's story was important, and I had no qualms about that. But Gutter Child for me is a bit harder because it's like, you know, I made it all up. And so does it really matter? Does it really make a difference? Is it important? Is it worth pushing? Is it just for a small audience? And I think I don't necessarily have an answer to all that now, but I do believe, you know, I'm a person of faith, so I believe very strongly in purpose. And I believe I wrote the book for a purpose. I believe it's out there for a purpose. And what I have to accept is that the people who need it will find it when they find it. And that's something I have to tell myself almost daily.
Oh, yeah. I think that you are so right on that one. And I would say even, you know, that your purpose of writing, you know, your dad's story too was then to further help Gutter Child come into the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. My next question, I'd love to know, of the publishing journey that you've been on so far, what has been your favorite part and what has been your least favorite part?
My favorite part in the publishing journey, I mean, Gutter Child it's a tough one because Gutter Child and Stone Thrower for me are special for two different reasons. Gutter Child, seeing the cover of Gutter Child and seeing the arc the first time it came together was probably like one of the highlights. And I would say seeing the cover of both books when it finally got to the right spot. Stone Thrower had a few missteps in the cover world. But when your book is the cover you know it's meant to be is a really special moment. I think signing on with HarperCollins for Gutter Child was a big moment too. They invited me in and we had champagne, and that was, especially now that we're in quarantine, feels like a really special moment.
Very special.
So those are some big highlights and special moments. I think the challenges are always the rejections and the uncertainty. I really struggle with like award season and just like you feel the feels. You feel jealous. You feel sad. You feel selfish for feeling sad and feeling jealous. And so I would say the low part, the hardest part of publishing is just riding that emotional roller coaster and sitting in it okay and just being okay with whatever presents itself, whether that's jealousy, whether you are, you know, can be genuinely happy for a friend that has an awesome success. It's just like owning who you are and being okay with the emotional mess that comes with writing a book.
Yes. And there's quite an emotional mess that comes with it. And you know, I feel like you're really talking about the emotional mess too of like having the book not be completely yours anymore and, you know, letting other people be a part of it is challenging for sure.
Yeah. But I think for me, other people reading it, there's an anxiety with that, like a certain amount of stomach knot that comes with it. But I don't really struggle with like more people being invited into the book. It's more about the comparison, to be honest. I struggle the most with the comparison. I think sense. Part of it is just being a sports person and an athlete all my life. Like it is very difficult for me to turn off competition.
Right. You're a little competitive when it comes to everything that could happen, like the end of the year listicles and all of that.
Exactly. And it's not so much that I feel like I don't want other people to have success. It's not selfish in that way. Yeah. It's more just like how do I remind myself that I'm good at this, that I've I've got a gift and that it's okay, even when I don't get the acknowledgement from other people or places that I would have liked it. So that's, I think, the real battle I'm in is a battle against myself.
Yes, that's always such a battle for me too. Well, my next question is more about your writing process, how you actually draft your work. Are you more of a pantser, more of a planner, or do you fall somewhere in between?
So in life, I am a diligent, devoted planner. And I would say on the first 2 books, I was much more of a pantser because I didn't know what I was doing. And that probably was one of the detriments in my writing process, is I just hadn't figured out how to plan effectively.
Yeah.
I think I got where I needed to go, but like I wasted a lot of time and a lot of energy going sideways instead of forward sometimes. So with my newest work, I'm very much more planning, and I'm very deliberate and very careful. And already I can see like my efficiency magnifying. So I would say previously a pantser, now a committed planner.
I love it. Yeah, you've made a definite switch on the teams. I used to be a
Yes.
hardcore pantser too, because there is like a certain magic and like just, specialness about pantsing and sitting there and just seeing what's going to happen, having your characters lead you. But then I found that I would just end up rewriting so much. I would get stuck in a hole. And yeah, revision time is definitely a lot less for me if I planned it out a little bit in the
Exactly.
forefront.
Well, and that's it. Like with Gutter Child, I was so aware of Alamina as a character and so clear about the certain places I wanted her to be and go in the story. But all of the in-betweens I hadn't really figured out.
Yeah.
Like, how did she get there and why? And like, there was so much backstory that I just was like, yeah. But especially in a dystopia, those things are critical. Like
Yes.
the rules, the laws, the system is so important. So I think with the new one, that's also, it's a sequel to Gutter Child. I'm really trying to think about things before I start writing. And I think that's also an important thing to recognize is oftentimes we think writing is when we sit down at our computer or we sit down at the page.
Yeah.
But I know that writing is like all the time that happens in between. And so maybe what it is that I'm a pantser in my mind, but when I sit down to write, when I sit down to do the work, there's a plan and there's a focus. So I can go all over in my notes, my thought process, but when I'm actually starting to write the story, I want a clear sense of where we are, what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, I like that. As I always say, not writing is still writing. I sometimes I go for a walk with my kids and I'm thinking about the story, and that is still part of the writing process. I mean, we can't just sit in front of our computers all day long.
Exactly.
Well, lovely. Thank you for sharing that. I love asking that question because we all do things very differently in the writing process. And, I know people who spend 6 months on an outline and, don't change from it as they draft. And that is amazing. I'm more like to plot along the way. But, I think for authors who maybe are just starting out or haven't really found their groove with their writing style, it can help to hear, how other people do things.
For sure.
Wonderful. Well, the next thing that I'd love for you to share with me, Jael, is something that your readers wouldn't necessarily know about you.
So something that people wouldn't know about me. So I think one of the things that I really love that people can sometimes be surprised by, but I'm just so passionate about I don't care, is I'm very interested, very passionate about it. I love cowboy boots.
Ooh.
And I actually have like a bit of a collection going. And it's funny because when I was growing up, I used to go to this horseback riding camp. My dad would be a guest speaker there, and he would talk, and we would do all this stuff there. And so I don't know if it was that, but at the time, I've always drawn it back to, that's the camp I went to. It has to do with that. But when I actually wrote the book, The Stone Thrower, and I went back to my dad's hometown, one of the things that's big in the story is this realization that my dad grew up in a very rural town where, there were like all kinds of activities and events based on, this sort of rural community. And it just wasn't, I thought my dad grew up in something that looked like Brooklyn, literally, in my head. And so it's been really interesting because I've always loved cowboy boots. My husband bought me my first pair like about 10 years ago, and now I've gotten a few more. I went to Nashville, and, you know, all of these things that have happened since then that I've sort of decided it's just part of what I love. But it brought me so much joy to recognize that that's connected to my roots and where my family is from, and that it's a lot deeper than just this interest in cowboy boots and country music and, you know, that kind of cultural experience.
I love that. I love cowboy boots. My dad is very much a country boy, and he buys cowboy boots for all of the grandkids. So he bought my 2 oldest are from my husband's previous marriage, but, you know, my family has been amazing just accepting them as their own grandchildren. And he bought my oldest a pair of these, like, you know, very girly pink cowboy boots with like sparkles and diamonds all over it. It's been super fun. She loves to wear them around. Even though they're a little too small for her now, she still loves to rock the cowboy boots.
I love it. I bought my niece a pair a while back, and my neighbor, like, anytime I went to buy my own, there was always these, like, other girl pairs.
Yes.
And I don't have any girls in my life, except for one niece. So I always get her the coolest stuff.
That's so great. Yes, I love cowboy boots. Well, thank you for sharing that. My next question, how much time do you spend writing, you know, day to day? I used to have this question, say, on a typical day, but I feel like there's no typical day anymore with the craziness of our world.
Yeah, I am what I call, I've labeled myself a block writer. I tend to write really well and in large quantities in blocks. So I did NaNoWriMo this past November, and I oftentimes, when I'm working on a particular revision, I'll work on it devotedly for like 2 weeks, multiple hours of the day. Like, work will take second place. Weekends are not a thing. Like, I'll just write really hard for 2 weeks. I do that better than writing an hour at a time because I find it hard to remember what I've written before and what I was doing before. So sometimes I'll work in chunks, like a chapter a day. But when I'm really, like, into it, I'll need to take, like, a week or two just to work through the manuscript. The longer I take, the longer it takes for me to get into it every day.
Oh, yeah. I think I can relate to you on that one too. I have a 10-month-old, and so it's hard for me to get those good blocks, but I found when I, you know, sit down and can get into it when he's taking his good naps, the words definitely come a lot better. And I did NaNoWriMo too this last time, and I found myself writing on my phone a lot this year instead of actually at my computer.
Yep, I did like almost my whole first draft in this next novel on my phone, and then send it to my computer, and then put it all together. And then for NaNoWriMo, I focused on the second draft, working all the way through it.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. My next question is about how writing can be, you know, emotionally draining and kind of it can be stressful at times, right? Depending on where you are in the process. I mean, I feel like for authors who aren't agented, don't have, you know, deadlines in the publishing world, it shouldn't be that stressful, even though sometimes it is. But, you know, life is crazy right now. There's lots of going on. I mean, I feel like there's lots of self-care that needs to happen, and writing is something that you take stuff from inside of you and you're externally putting it on a page, and it can be hard to do that if, you know, your inner well is empty. So I just kind of want to ask you if you have any tips that you've found, you know, from your experience dealing with deadlines and writing and stress that you could share with other writers.
Yeah, I mean, writing it is an emotional roller coaster. It has real highs and real lows. I would say it's important to remember that lots of people start books, but a much smaller amount actually finish them. Yeah. And that's both an encouragement to those who haven't finished them, that it's okay. Like, life will go on even if you don't finish that novel that's in your desk. Like, it's okay, and something will come from it, whether that's just an idea or a thought or just like a thing that sits in your desk that you always want to go back to. I don't think there's anything wrong with not finishing, but it's also that if you do want to finish, and if you do want to be a part of that second group that finishes the started manuscript, it will take a lot of grit and a lot of exhaustion. And even when you do that, it may not, turn out exactly as you think. And so I think the biggest thing I take away, whether it's about writing or about anything else, is to just find your own peace in your circumstances. And for me, writing is critical. Like, I just can't seem to function without it. Like, as soon as I finish one book, the idea for the next book comes.
Yeah.
And so until that urge, that itch, that momentum stops, I'm just going to keep doing it, because it's actually harder not to write. It was like when I was in labor with my son, I remember being really exhausted. And the midwife was like, hey, like, you're going to have a contraction, but, like, if you're tired, like, you can rest. But I was like, how does that work, though?
Right.
Like, my body is physically pushing this kid out, even if I don't have the energy to. I have to, like, roll with it. And that's kind of how I see writing. Sometimes I don't really have the energy to do it, but it's also, like, part of me, and it's what I have to do. So, like, I just, instead of worrying about it, I try and figure out strategies that make it work for me, instead of fighting it. So, exercise is a really important part of writing for me. I actually have to, like, sweat outside of my office in order to be able to sit down at my office at my computer and focus on the story that's coming out. The more I sort of just sit around, the more my brain just actually spins unproductively. So exercise has been a really important part of it. Prayer for me has been a really important part of it. I remember hearing author Richard Wagamis, who's an Indigenous writer up here, he passed away a few years ago. I remember him saying that when he gets to his desk, he always begins by thanking his creator for the gift. And it's something that stuck with me, and so I try and remember to be thankful for the gift, and to remember that it is a gift and it is part of my purpose, and so not to fight it, not to fight it too hard, but rather to sit in it and try and figure out strategies that make me better.
Oh, I love all of that. I think you touch on some really important notes, and definitely to find the joy and the peace in it. I'm with you too. Writing is something that, for me is a very therapeutic process going through life. Like, and I didn't write for about 6 months out of this year. My son was born this year, so I mean there was a lot going on. But I found that once I started writing again, like, I just felt better. It's something that I love. It's something that is so helpful to me, and I love your note about exercise too, especially in this time where we're pretty cooped up. We've got not a lot of options as where we can go. I found that walking every day around my neighborhood, even if it's the same walk every single day, there's something so nice about that fresh air, clearing my head, and getting out there in the sunshine. And, I think prayer too, that's a good one to be thankful for the gift. That's what I'm going to try. I like that one. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing those. I mean, I think this is just a good conversation to have, even before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, I just feel like, there's a lot more people out there struggling with lots of different things. So it's good to just remember that we got to take care of ourselves throughout the whole process, and definitely give yourself grace, but remember to find that joy and the peace in the whole process of writing.
Yeah, and I think it's too, I have a lot of conversations about social justice work and, how do you do it and how do you stick to it? Because other than the book, I also run a literary festival for underrepresented voices in Canada. And so one of the things I say there, too, is you have to remember that this work is long-term. You may have a book that's short-term, but your life, your career is hopefully a longer-term process. Yeah. And so the systems, the plan, the process you put in place can't just be about, like, punching out this one book in a frenetic pace. It's got to be about developing the stability to do the things that matter to you on a consistent basis. And so, and this comes into place when we talked about, writing process. You've got to figure out, like, what's a long-range sort of strategy for your writing, and, maybe what happens, at the later stages, the copy editing stages, or, do you change the way your day is set up? Do you change the amount of free time you have in order to get something done at the last minute? Maybe. But for me, it's been about, like, how do I not disadvantage my family too much
Yeah.
by what I need to complete.
Definitely.
I can get really frenetic about deadlines and just be like, I have to meet this deadline. But every deadline an editor sets almost always has a little bit of grace. And so trying to give myself that little bit of grace is really important, rather than just being obsessive about deadlines.
Yeah, I think that is a good note to remember too. Yeah, I have found that my writing, I can't get it done in the house usually with all 3 kids awake. So it usually happens in the dark when everyone else is asleep at this point in my life. But as I'm sure as they all get older, it will be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Well,
you find ways.
Yes, you do.
The different ages of your kids. Like, that's what I found was most difficult about quarantine, is that my son was home all the time and was up almost at the same hours I was. And so I had to write before he got up and after he went to bed, and that was like later and earlier than I would have liked. And then during the day I was trying to battle like teaching him and doing my own work, and so I was burnt. Because there was no way to get your own time automatically, like when he's at school, which is what I was used to. So, it's tough when you have kids, but with each change in your family, whatever that is, I think you find your new groove.
Yeah.
And you make something work. And it might not settle in right away. You might not like it initially, but you find a new routine.
Definitely.
You have to.
Yeah, you have to if you want to get it done. I mean, my kids are still doing virtual school, so it's definitely a challenge, but we'll make it through.
And a parent.
Yes.
And a baby.
Yes.
Woo,
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. So yeah, I've tried to wake up early, but I feel like the earlier I wake up, they all know. The children know, and they wake up early on those same days too. So I just stay up late because they're sleepy at that time, and it's fine.
Yeah. It's much more predictable, the late night stuff.
Yes.
But I've never been great at writing at night. I've gotten better, though. If I shut myself up right, I can do it. But when I'm done at night, though, I'm done. I can't push myself any further.
Oh, yeah. There's some nights where I don't get very much in, but that's where writing on the phone comes in handy. While I'm, putting the baby down to sleep, I can write on one hand or just write throughout the day.
Now that's adapting. That is true.
Yes, there you go. Well, I have just one final question for you, and I do apologize. It is a hard question, so if you need a minute to think about it, that's totally fine. I'd love to know, what is your favorite book right now? This isn't your favorite book of all time, because that is silly, but just something you've read recently that you can't stop telling people about.
There's so many different ways to tackle this question. So the books, I will say, there's sort of a theme in the books that mean the most to me. And then I will answer the question specifically. I will not just dance around it.
Okay.
But the books that have meant, just so you know, the books that have meant the most to me, because I'm a person of faith, I like novels. I like novels that deal with race and racism, and that address the head-on complications of being in the world that we're in, you know. And then I love books that question faith, too. Not just like, everything is great, God is good, blah, blah, blah. But, really wrestle with the truth of our lives, the truth of the day. So all the books that I deeply connect to usually, hit on all of those things, and women. So the book that, most recently I read and thought, oh my gosh, my life is complete if I've only read this book, was Transcended Kingdom by Jael. And the interesting thing about it, her last book, Homegoing, was also, a book that, punched me in the gut, and I wanted to, sleep with it under my pillow for days and days and days. And so Transcendent Kingdom by Jael is for sure the book that's sitting with me quite deeply. I want to give an honorable mention to another book called Indians on Vacation by Thomas King. And that book similarly deals with racism, deals with a faith system in a slightly different way, but was very funny and very clever humor in the book. And so I think what I love about the two of them together mentioning is I feel like they taught me different things. One was really like hit close to home in terms of like, I feel like Ya and I would be best friends. And so I tell myself. And Thomas King's book really taught me about the craft of writing, how you can take something serious and make it funny and clever and provoking at the same time. And so those are my final answers.
Yes. Thank you. I loved it. You did great for being on the spot for that question. I love asking this question because getting book recommendations from somebody else's mouth is the best, but we also just end up missing a lot of the great books that are out there because so many books are out there and come out every week. So thank you.
Yeah, and I should say, because I find pandemic times is a difficult reading time. It's been challenging for me. I can't even imagine for you being both pregnant and then having a baby, all of that in this. I don't know if I would have read a book at all.
I didn't read a book for a very long time this year.
Yeah, it was really, I do a column for our broadcast in Canada, CBC, and so I have to, and I was really struggling at one point. I'm never going to finish a book again. I don't know how to do this. But that's also, I think, Transcendent Kingdom, I should mention, was an excellent audiobook as well. And I like to mention that to people who listen to podcasts because sometimes that's an easier way to complete books, especially in these kinds of times when our brains are stuck. So Transcendent Kingdom is an excellent book, but also an excellent audiobook. And then Thomas King's was a fast read, despite the fact of my brain feeling quite cluttered at the time.
Well, that is a good recommendation. Yeah, I love a good audiobook when you can't. For me, I can usually read on my phone really good right now, but audiobooks are good because I've always got somebody in my arms. So.
I know, and what I love about audiobooks, I use them a lot when I'm cooking, is that you can, especially with Ya Jesse's, both of her books, there are cultural references and voices from different members of other communities and Ghanaian references in both of the books. And the accents, I find, just really enrich the listening experience. It allows you to, hear the places that are being represented in the book in a special way. So, big fan of Ya Jesse's, and it's spelled Gyasi, her last name. Her books are great audiobooks for that reason in particular.
Wonderful. Well, I've added it to my list, my ever-growing list. Jael, thank you so much for chatting with me today, telling us all about Gutter Child and letting me and my listeners get to know you as a person and as an author. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Authors and Agents with Rose Quinn. I hope you got to know Jael a little bit better and that you're pre-ordering Gutter Child right now. Do it, you guys. This one is going to be huge. I just can feel it in my bones. Please make sure to rate and review this podcast if you can, wherever you're listening. If you're not able to rate and review, please make sure to share it. Tell your friends. Tweet about it. Instagram it. Tag me at Rose Quinney, QUINNY. I would love to hear from you guys. And thanks again for listening.